She texted her mother from the darkness of a cold industrial basement, her phone the only light in the room.
Mom, help me,
Please, I'm scared. Mom, help me. The blue light of the phone illuminates Sluna's tear-streaked face in the dark basement as Jahan's footsteps echo above. Her mother's reply was a cold reminder of the debt they owed. Don't be ungrateful, Sluna. Jahan is family. Just listen to him. What Sluna didn't know was that her mother wasn't coming to save her, but a man watching from the shadows was already deciding Jahan's fate. At 27, Sloane Whitaker had spent her entire life being the bridge, the one who held her family together, and the one who paid for her mother's survival with her own freedom. She thought her ex-husband, Johan, was the only man she would ever have to fear. She was wrong. That night, trapped in an industrial warehouse, while Jahan's hand tightened around her arm with practiced precision, Sluna was forced to choose between the loyalty that was killing her and the survival her body was screaming for. The air in the industrial basement was thick with the scent of motor oil and stagnant history, but for Sluna, the cold draft felt like her mother's breath on the back of her neck, frail, desperate, and demanding. As Jahan's hand tightened around her arm, the physical pressure acted as a trigger, dragging her mind back through the blur of the last 6 months. It hadn't started with a dark basement. It had started in a sterile hospital room where the beeping of monitors provided the soundtrack to Sluna, Undoing. Her mother, Beatrice, had always been a woman of fragile sensibilities and expensive needs, but the stage 4 diagnosis had turned those needs into a cage. Sluna remembered the day the insurance company's rejection letter sat on the bedside table like a death warrant. That was the day Johan had reappeared, smelling of expensive cologne and false promises. "I can take care of her, Sluna," he had whispered, leaning over the hospital bed while Beatrice watched him with the adoration of a drowning woman seeing a life raft. The specialists, the private nursing, the experimental treatments, it's all just a signature away. Johan knew that for Sluna, duty wasn't just a concept, it was a religion. He didn't ask for her love. He knew he had burned that bridge years ago with his infidelities and the subtle, psychological chipping away of her self-worth. Instead, he asked for her cooperation. He needed her back in his orbit to lend an air of legitimacy to his expanding business ventures, using her linguistic skills and clean reputation as a front for his darker dealings. "Don't be selfish, baby," Beatrice had rasped from the pillows, her hand clutching Sluna, until her knuckles turned white. "Johan is trying to save us. Why do you always have to make everything so difficult?" The guilt had been more effective than any physical shackle. For 3 months, Sluna had played the part of the dutiful ex-wife, attending consultations that felt like interrogations and signing documents she wasn't allowed to fully read. Each signature bought another month of her mother's life, but it cost Sluna a piece of her soul. Now, standing in the gloom of the warehouse, the family meeting Johan had promised had finally revealed its true face. The elegant emerald dress she wore was a costume he had picked out, a cruel irony for a woman being held in a cellar. When she had stumbled upon the ledger upstairs, the one showing that Johan wasn't just paying the medical bills, but was actually siphoning her mother's remaining trust fund into his own accounts, the facade had shattered. You're not leaving, Sluna," Johan hissed, his bearded face inches from hers. "You're going to stay here until we finish this. You owe me." Sluna looked at her phone, the screen glowing with her mother's latest betrayal. Just listen to him. The debt of duty had finally become a death sentence, and as the shadows shifted in the corner of the room, she realized she was no longer waiting for a miracle. She was waiting for a revolution. Above the damp, suffocating air of the basement, the shadows lived in a different world. Kang Ji-Hoon stood on the rusted steel catwalk, a silent silhouette in a black suit that seemed to absorb what little light filtered through the industrial windows. To anyone below, he was a ghost. To himself, he was a predator watching a clumsy amateur dismantle a masterpiece. He adjusted his cufflinks, his eyes fixed on the scene below. He had spent months tracking Jahan's financial movements, watching as the man bled his own company dry to fund a lifestyle of hollow grandeur. Johan had come to this warehouse to finalize a foreclosure on Jahan's assets, expecting to find a desperate businessman. Instead, he found a coward. From his vantage point, the contrast was jarring. There was Sloane, a woman who radiated a quiet, resilient intelligence even while her face was tracked with tears, her emerald dress a vibrant splash of life against the gray concrete. And then there was Johan, his beard unkempt, his movements erratic and fueled by a fragile, bloated ego. Johan watched as Johan's grip tightened on Sloane's arm, his fingers digging into her skin with a practiced precision that spoke of a long history of intimidation. Johan felt a cold, familiar fury tightening in his chest. In his world, power was a scalpel, used with intent and discipline. Johan used it like a hammer, smashing anything he couldn't control. Johan listened to the echoes of Johan's voice, the desperate, high-pitched demands for loyalty, and compared them to the silence Sloane maintained. She wasn't broken, she was waiting. He noted the way she clutched her phone, her thumb hovering over the screen as if waiting for a signal that would never come. He had already intercepted the communications between Johan and the Russian creditors. He knew that Johan was planning to sell Sloane's linguistic contracts as collateral for a debt he could never repay. Johan wasn't just a failure as a businessman. He was a traitor to the very woman who had kept him afloat. Johan signaled to the two men standing in the darkness behind him. He had seen enough. The shadow in the rafters began his descent, his boots making no sound on the metal stairs. He wasn't moving to save a damsel. He was moving to reclaim an asset that Johan was too blind to value. As he stepped into the dim light of the basement floor, the air seemed to drop another 10 degrees. Johan froze, his hand still clamped on Sloane's wrist, as the man in the black suit finally emerged from the dark. The time for observation was over. The time for the execution of Johan's authority had begun. The silence in the basement was no longer empty. It was heavy, pressing against Sloane's lungs like rising water. Johan's patience, always a thin veneer for his volatility, finally snapped. He lunged forward, his fingers clamping around Sloane's upper arm with a bruising force that made her gasp. This wasn't the tentative hold of a man trying to persuade. It was the practiced precision of a jailer reclaiming a runaway. "You think a few numbers in a ledger change the reality of what you owe me?" Johan hissed, his breath hot against her cheek. He jerked her closer, forcing her to stumble on the uneven concrete. "I bought your mother's life. I bought your time. You don't get to look behind the curtain and decide you're done." Sloane struggled, her emerald dress rustling violently against the grit of the basement floor, but her physical resistance only seemed to fuel his ego. To her left, the bearded enforcer moved into the light. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. He stood with his arms crossed, a human barricade representing the sheer, immovable force of intimidation. He was the silent enforcer, the final seal on her exit. Every time Sloane's eyes darted toward the stairs, he shifted just enough to remind her that there were no accidents in this room, only consequences. She looked down at her phone, still clutched in her free hand like a piece of driftwood in a storm. The screen remained dark. No siren was coming. No heroic intervention from the mother who had traded Sloane's soul for a few more months of comfort. In that moment, the last flickering spark of hope, the belief that someone from her world would come for her, died a quiet, cold death. She was alone in the dark with two men who viewed her as a ledger entry. "Look at me, Sloane," Johan commanded, shaking her slightly. "There is no one else. There is just this room and the debt you're going to pay." She went still, her body sagging as the realization took hold. The air felt thinner, the shadows longer. But as Johan leaned in to deliver his final ultimatum, a new sound cut through the oppressive quiet. It wasn't the frantic pace of a rescuer or the heavy tread of a guard. It was the slow, rhythmic click of expensive leather soles against the metal stairs. Deliberate, calm, and terrifyingly controlled. The grip on her arm didn't loosen, but she felt Johan's pulse spike through his fingertips. He sensed it too. The atmosphere in the basement didn't just change, it inverted. The predator had become the prey, though he was too arrogant to know it yet. Sloane raised her head, her tear-streaked face catching the first glint of the black suit descending from the rafters, realizing that while her old life had abandoned her, a new, far more dangerous one was stepping into the light. The heavy, rhythmic click of leather on concrete grew louder, echoing through the basement until it felt like a countdown. Johan's grip on Sloane's arm tightened instinctively, his eyes darting toward the stairs as the silhouette in the black suit stepped fully into the dim, yellow light. Kang Ji-Hoon didn't run. He didn't shout. He simply moved with the terrifying calmness of a man who already owned the room. "You're late for our meeting, Johan," Ji-Hoon said, his voice a low, melodic baritone that cut through the basement's humidity. Johan let out a jagged, nervous laugh, though he didn't let go of Sloane. "Mr. Kang, I didn't expect you down here. This is just a private family matter. If you'll give me a moment to settle this." "I don't have a moment," Ji-Hoon interrupted, stopping exactly 6 feet away. His gaze dropped to Johan's hand, which was still bruising Sloane's skin. "And I don't believe in settling matters with family by using
Let go
force.
of her.
It suggests a
who
lack
she
of
is?
intellectual leverage.
finished.
It suggests you've lost control." "You don't understand,"
Let go
Johan
of her.
hissed, his face
Do you know
reddening.
who she is?
"She's the collateral.
finished.
Her contracts, her mother's estate. It's all part of the deal I'm offering you."
Let go of her.
Ji-Hoon
Do you know
tilted
who
his
she
head,
is?
a ghost of a
You're
smile
finished.
touching his lips, though his eyes remained as cold as a winter sea. He reached into his inner pocket and pulled out a thin, cream-colored envelope. "That's where you're mistaken. You aren't in a position to offer me anything anymore." He tossed the envelope onto a rusted industrial table between them. "I spent the morning speaking with your creditors. The Russians, the private banks, even the predatory lenders you used to cover your ex-wife's mother's bills. I found them all very eager to sell. As of 10 minutes ago, I am your sole debt holder, Johan. I own your properties. I own your shipping licenses. And I own the very roof over this basement." Johan's hand went slack. His fingers slid off Sloane's arm as the blood drained from his face. The silent enforcer in the corner shifted uncomfortably, sensing the sudden shift in the food chain. Ji-Hoon stepped forward, closing the distance until he was standing directly in front of Sloane. He didn't look at Johan again. He looked only at her, his expression softening into something unreadable but intensely focused. "The debt is paid, Ms. Whitaker," he said softly, offering his hand. "Not because he deserved it, but because you are worth more than the sum of his failures." Sloane looked at the hand, large, steady, and extended not as a command, but as an invitation. For the first time in years, the crushing weight in her chest lifted. She took his hand, her fingers trembling against his warm palm as she stepped out of Johan's shadow and into the cold, sharp light of a new world. The transition from the grime of the industrial basement to the sterile perfection of the penthouse was a violent assault on Sloane's senses. The air here didn't smell of oil and damp concrete. It smelled of expensive sandalwood and the crisp, filtered oxygen of a world high above the clouds. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of a city that looked like a toy set, shimmering with lights that seemed too far away to be real. Sloane stood in the center of the vast living room, her emerald dress now a tattered relic of a life she had barely escaped. She didn't sit. She didn't move. She simply clutched her phone, its screen still dark and silent, and waited for the price of this rescue to be named. Kang Ji-Hoon stood by a sleek marble counter, pouring 2 glasses of water with the same terrifyingly precise movements he had used to dismantle Johan. He looked at home in this glass cage, a king in a fortress of chrome and velvet. When he approached her, offering the glass, Sloane instinctively flinched, her shoulders tensing as if expecting a blow or a grasp. "You're safe here, Sloane," he said, his voice as smooth as the water he held. "Safe is a relative term," she replied, her voice raspy from the basement's chill. She looked around the room, noting the security cameras tucked into the corners and the heavy, silent men stationed at the elevators. Johan had a cage, too. It was just made of debt instead of diamond glass. "What do you want from me, Mr. Kang? Men like you don't buy other people's failures out of the goodness of their hearts." Ji-Hoon set the glass down on a side table, refusing to bridge the distance she had set between them. He watched her with an intensity that felt like a scan, reading the trauma in the set of her jaw and the way she shielded her bruised arm. "Johan saw a tool to be used until it snapped," Ji-Hoon said calmly. "I see an asset that was being wasted. You have a gift for languages, for nuances, for seeing the patterns in people that most men are too arrogant to notice. I didn't rescue you to be a decoration, Sloane. I rescued you because I need a partner who can see the world the way you do." Sloane looked at the city below, feeling the vertigo of her new reality. The penthouse was beautiful, but it was still a high-altitude prison until she had a way to leave. She didn't trust the softness in his voice or the way he spoke of partnership. She had spent her life being a bridge for others to walk on, and she wasn't ready to believe that this man, a man whose very name carried the weight of the Korean underworld, wanted anything different. "I've spent years listening to men tell me what I am," she whispered, her reflection in the glass looking like a ghost haunting a palace. "I'm not looking for a new master, even one with better taste." Ji-Hoon nodded, a flicker of respect crossing his face. "Good, then tomorrow we start proving that you don't have one." The sun had barely begun to crest over the city's jagged skyline when Kang Ji-Hoon entered the glass-walled study, found Sloane staring at a stack of intercepted manifests. She hadn't slept. The adrenaline of her transition from the basement to the penthouse had morphed into a restless, intellectual hunger. She didn't look up as he approached, her finger tracing a series of Cyrillic notations and Hanja characters scribbled in the margins of a shipping log. "They're hiding the weight," she murmured, her voice stripped of its earlier tremors. "The translation Johan's team provided says these are industrial parts, but the linguistic shift in the shipping codes suggests a different origin, Busan, not Vladivostok. They're using outdated dialects to mask the paper trail." Ji-Hoon stood behind her, observing the way her mind moved with the speed of a high-frequency trader. He had known she was a student of linguistics, but seeing her dismantle a sophisticated smuggling cipher with nothing but a highlighter and a sharp eye confirmed his instincts. "The world runs on the things people refuse to say out loud," Ji-Hoon said, placing a new, encrypted tablet on the desk. "Johan thought your talent was a party trick. I think it's a weapon. My shipping empire handles billions in cargo across borders where the wrong word can start a war or cost a fortune. I need a liaison, someone who speaks the language of the shadow market and the boardroom simultaneously." Sloane finally looked at him, her eyes searching his for the catch. "And if I find something you don't like?" "Then you've done your job," he replied simply. He didn't give her a manual. He gave her a security clearance. For the rest of the morning, Sloane was immersed in the inner workings of the Kang syndicate's legitimate front. She found herself on a high-stakes video call with a port authority in Incheon, translating nuances that a standard AI couldn't grasp, detecting the hesitation in a customs official's tone, the subtle honorifics that signaled a bribe was being requested. For the first time in her life, Sloane wasn't a hostage or a bridge for someone else's feet. She was the filter through which power flowed. When she successfully redirected a stalled $3 million shipment by using a specific regional dialect to appeal to an official's pride, she felt a strange, intoxicating hum in her chest. It was the feeling of a voice being reclaimed. As she closed the laptop, she noticed her hands weren't shaking anymore. She looked at Ji-Hoon, who was watching her from the doorway with a look of silent, grim approval. The glass cage was still there, but the door was no longer locked from the outside. She was learning that in this new world, knowledge wasn't just power. It was the only currency that could truly buy her way out of the dark. The fragile peace Sloane had built within the high-altitude silence of the penthouse shattered with a single vibration of her phone. She had expected Johan to crawl into a hole after Ji-Hoon dismantled his empire, but desperation had turned her ex-husband into something far more volatile. The first blow came via social media, a coordinated strike of leaked, doctored photos and redacted emails designed to paint Sloane not as a victim or a linguist, but as a corporate spy who had seduced Ji-Hoon to facilitate a hostile takeover of Johan's legitimate businesses. The headlines were predatory, using her name as clickbait for the very industry circles she had just begun to command. But it was the second blow that drew blood. A frantic FaceTime request from her mother popped up, and when Sloane answered, Beatrice's face was a mask of hysterical disappointment. "How could you, Sloane?" her mother wailed, the hospital monitors in the background chirping like panicked birds. "Johan called me. He said you're working with criminals now. He said because of you, the hospital is threatening to discharge me because the suspicious funds have been frozen. He was the only one looking out for us, and you've ruined it with your pride." "Mom, listen to me," Sloane pleaded, her voice cracking. Johan was stealing from you. I saw the ledgers. I don't care about ledgers. I care about my breath. I care about my bed. Beatrice's voice rose to a shriek. You've always been so ungrateful. If I die in a state ward, it will be your name on the death certificate. The call ended with a digital snap, leaving Sloane standing in the center of the marble kitchen, the air suddenly as thin and cold as it had been in the basement. The breakdown was physical. Her knees gave way, and she slumped against the counter, the tablet containing the morning's shipping successes sliding to the floor. The glass cage felt like it was finally splintering. Every sacrifice she had made, every humiliation she had endured for her mother's sake, had been inverted and used as a weapon against her. She was hyperventilating, the old familiar weight of the bridge crushing her chest, when a steadying hand landed on her shoulder. She didn't flinch this time. She couldn't. He's using the only lever he has left. Ji-Hoon's voice was like an anchor in the storm. He can't touch your body, so he's trying to dismantle your mind. Is that what you're going to allow him? Sloane looked up, her eyes red-rimmed but flickering with a new, dangerous light. He's killing her, Ji-Hoon. He's making her hate me so he can win. Then stop playing his game, Ji-Hoon said, his thumb brushing away a stray tear with a tenderness that didn't match the cold steel in his eyes. In my world, when an enemy uses your heart as a shield, you don't stop fighting. You just change your aim. The return to the industrial district felt like descending into a previous life, but the geography was the only thing that remained the same. As the black SUV pulled up to the rusted gates of the warehouse, Sloane didn't feel the suffocating dread that had defined her last visit. Behind her, two of Ji-Hoon's men, silent, stone-faced professionals in tailored coats, stepped out with a synchronized precision that shifted the entire energy of the street. They didn't carry weapons openly, but their presence was a physical wall between Sloane and the world that had tried to break her. She stepped into the basement, the heels of her boots clicking sharply against the concrete. The smell of oil and stagnant air was still there, but it no longer felt like a tomb. Johan was there, sitting at a battered metal desk, surrounded by the remnants of a life he was losing by the second. He looked up, his face lighting up with a desperate, predatory hope that vanished the moment he saw the men flanking her. Sloane, he rasped, standing up so quickly his chair screeched against the floor. You've come to your senses. Tell these people to leave. Your mother. She's getting worse, Sloane. She needs us to work together. Sloane didn't flinch. She didn't even stop until she was standing at the edge of the desk, the very place where he had once bruised her arm. She reached into her bag and pulled out a physical folder, a deliberate choice in a digital age. She laid it on the desk like a guillotine blade. I'm not here for a negotiation, Johan, and I'm certainly not here for my mother, she said, her voice echoing with a cold, crystalline authority. I'm here to show you the end. She flipped the pages, revealing the forensic accounting Ji-Hoon's team had finalized. It wasn't just the embezzlement from her mother's trust. It was the systematic laundering of Russian capital through a shell company Johan had opened in Sloane's name without her knowledge. You didn't just steal money, she whispered, leaning in until he was forced to look into her eyes. You tried to steal my future. You thought because I was quiet, I was blind. But linguistics is about more than words, Johan. It's about the truth hidden between the lines. And the truth is, you're a thief who was too arrogant to realize he was being watched. Johan reached for the folder, but one of Ji-Hoon's men stepped forward, a single, subtle movement that froze Johan in his tracks. The power dynamic hadn't just shifted, it had been demolished. The authorities have these files now, Sloane continued, her heart beating with a steady, powerful rhythm. And Mr. Kang has bought the remainder of your soul. You have exactly 1 hour to vacate this property and never speak my name or my mother's name again. If you do, the suspicious funds won't just be frozen. They'll be the evidence that puts you away for the rest of your life. She turned on her heel, leaving him staring at the wreckage of his own greed. As she climbed the stairs toward the light, she realized she wasn't just leaving a basement. She was leaving the girl who needed to be saved behind, finally stepping into the woman who saved herself. The penthouse office was silent, but it was the silence of an engine at rest, not the hollow quiet of a grave. Sloane stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the sun dip below the Chicago skyline, painting the clouds in shades of bruised purple and defiant gold. In her hand, she held a new phone, not a lifeline to a predator, but a tool of her own making. Kang Ji-Hoon entered the room, the soft click of his footsteps no longer a sound that signaled a shift in the food chain, but the arrival of an equal. He stopped beside her, looking out at the city he had mastered. He didn't speak immediately. He gave her the space to occupy her own skin. "The paperwork for the hospital transfer is finalized," he said, his voice a low, steady anchor. "Your mother will be moved to the private wing at Northwestern tonight. No debts, no Johan, and no suspicious funds. Just the best care money and your own expertise can buy." Sloane turned to look at him. The emerald dress had been replaced by a sharp, tailored suit that felt like armor. "You're giving me the power to walk away, Ji-Hoon. You've cleared the board. Why?" Ji-Hoon leaned against the glass, his expression uncharacteristically open. "Because a partner who stays because they have to is a liability. A partner who stays because they want to is a revolution. I don't want a bridge, Sloane. I want the woman who knows how to read the world better than I do." Sloane looked down at her phone. She felt the weight of her past, the years of being handled and protected until she was nearly invisible. She thought of the basement, the bruise on her arm, and the mother who had traded her soul for a hospital bed. Then, she thought of the shipping manifests she had decoded and the power she had felt when her voice finally mattered. She began to type. Her thumbs didn't tremble. The message to her mother was short, a clean break from the cycle of guilt. "I don't need help anymore, Mom, and you don't need Johan. I'm coming to get you, on my terms." She hit send and felt the final shackle fall away. She wasn't just a daughter, a linguist, or a victim. She was the architect of her own shadow cabinet. "I'm staying," Sloane said, her gaze meeting Ji-Hoon's with a fire that matched the setting sun. "But we're doing this my way. No more basements. No more secrets from each other." Ji-Hoon offered a rare, genuine smile, a silent acknowledgement of the new dynasty they were building. "I wouldn't have it any other way." As they stood together, looking down at the city from their high-altitude throne, Sloane realized that the person who had saved her wasn't just the man in the black suit. It was the woman who had finally decided that her voice was worth more than her silence. The rescue was over. The rain had begun. "Perfect, I've parsed the document,"